Oh boy. Y'all got some behind the scenes there for anybody watching this later on. Hardy har har. All right. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So this was just a very last minute idea, mainly because of the fact that I'm in the middle of a bunch of schoolwork. And so when I found out something arrived today, I had to at least go live, give it a proper shake, and so on and so forth, because I just got done reading this. So I'm just going to share on the respective socials before I get this discussion. So this is less of like a live stream with how impromptu it's going to be. And it's more so just like a live review, I guess, is a better way that I will be describing it. So for those of you who are watching this after the fact, sorry for the preamble. I will probably try to do some, where are we? There we go. Yeah, I will probably try to do some trimming at the very beginning so it's less of an issue. And also, just so I can have less shakiness here, because having some tripod issues, but you know, whatevs. I will put that, I'm going to try to hold this a little more steady. That's unfortunately the issue when you're just like, yo, I gotta get it done, but okay, so let's just share this on the Twitter, X, whatever we are calling it at this particular point. Okay, Q. And I highly doubt every... Oh, Jose Storms, what's up, man? Yeah, this was very last minute, dude. I just got something in the mail that I was not expecting, and so I just read it, and in between schoolwork, I figured I would jump on and just give this a brief little shake. And I want to stop touching the damn thing because of the fact that the tripod's all effed up, but okay. Well, I will give it another minute or so. Once again, this is less of a real stream, and this is more just a live review because I wasn't going to have time for like a full-on edit or anything of that nature. So yeah, editing, overlaying, rendering. I've still got a bunch of math and Spanish I got to do tonight. So, but I just being Tower Tuesday and all, and just getting this baby in the mail, I wanted to give this a fair shake. Lou, what's going on, man? Hope you were doing well. You were definitely experiencing far more significant cold than I am here in the Arizona desert, man. So, got any snow? Not a chance, man. I mean, I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm in the deadly desert. If I'm going to quote, Return to Oz right there. So, well, it's 10 o'clock. So, obviously, dudes, that Jose and Lou, some longtime constant readers and, fellow friends of mine here in the interwebs and whatever. If you guys have anything specific you want to interject or ask or just topics you're going to pose, but I'm going to jump into a quick discussion about this and start this vidya proper. So, all right. Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I'm known on this level of the other way, tower, as Jaime and Fuego. And if it please you, join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King. That's Reezy, everybody. And so, yes, this is a impromptu live version for anybody who was watching this after the fact, for some of the friends, fellow constant readers and such that are trickling in, just saying hello, or if you have anything that you would like to impart as far as insight or questions or, comments, whatever it may be, greatly appreciated. But thanks to everybody who is watching this after the fact, because as I was saying before starting this video officially, this is more like a impromptu live review as opposed to like an actual premeditated live stream of sorts. But so I have a number of things that are on pre-order from Cemetery Dance, and you guys can't really see super well, but yeah, if I could get my directions proper down there, yeah, because the whole bass backwards thing always throws me off a little bit. But I have a number of Cemetery Dance specialties down there between the Doubleday years. You see Carrie is down there, Salem's Lot, The Shining. On pre-order currently, I have The Stand from Cemetery Dance, and then I also have Pet Cemetery. So that's going to round out the Doubleday years before King jumped over to Viking. And then, as you can also say, if I could get my directions on Amadeus, I'm feeling dyslexic right now, but I've also got one of the prized possessions is It back there, which I think was the first Cemetery Dance thing that I ever purchased, but tons of other great special things. But the thing is, besides just publishing special editions of Sai King and various other things, Cemetery Dance, which is headed up by Richard Chismar, and then shout out to our bloody Blue Gillian. I always forget how to properly pronounce the last name Blue, in case you happen to be checking in on this. But I got the chance. Shout out to Lou, who's in the chat right now. Between Lou, Mike Kern, Sarah, I did a few years ago a really fun. It was a virtual panel about Stephen King, both on screen, the television, and the theatrical stuff. So that was a blast. So anytime I get to share some palaver with those folks, once again, really cool. But so anyway, back to Cemetery Dance, though, that Blue is the managing editor for, if I remember correctly. But besides putting out all of the different book releases and stuff, one of their bread and butter is this. They put out a magazine. And so the Magazine of Horror and Suspense Cemetery Dance. I have a few different copies of this magazine. Pretty much anytime there is something Sai King that is featured in it, I make sure to pre-order. And so I pre-ordered this one a while back because there was the aforementioned Doubleday books. There's also something called Seasons of Terror that they've been working on for a while, which is a illustrated book that has stories from a few different people in it. I believe there's a Shirley Jackson in there. There's obviously a Stephen King. I think it's the Raft that they're doing, which I absolutely love. So that's exciting. But yeah, in any event, Cemetery Dance magazine. And this is the 79th issue of it. And it says right here in big bold letters on the front. The cover is pretty rad status, though. Check that out. You've got like these arachnid looking appendages, that are just protruding from this house. So I'm not sure if that's Chuck Palahniuk or Palahniuk. He's the guy who wrote Choke and Fight Club. Really, interesting author. I didn't really know that he delved a lot into horror, though. So, just his presence in this magazine, he gets the top billing, as you can see there, right along with Sai King, which is cool. So, what I do have to preface this right off the bat, though, by saying is that very prominently on the front here, we have the name, and you guys can see Frank Darabont. So, and I was even double checking because I was like, it says Frank Darabont on the cover. Where's Frank Darabont? So there was supposed to be in this issue, as it says right here in the features, Rick Hipson interviews Barry Hoffman of Gauntlet Press, who do a few other really kick-ass deluxe editions. I'm trying to remember if they were the ones behind my edition of Revival that I have, which is one of the best things Sai King has pretty much ever written, but especially as far as his New Millennium sort of stuff, man. So post-accident work and everything. But so of Gauntlet Press is interviewed about Hope and Miracles, The Shawshank Redemption, and The Green Mile. So from what I understand, this is a book that deals with just how Frank Darabont did such an incredible job with both of those films. They're both obviously prison-centric and everything. One dealing with some supernatural elements in The Green Mile and everything. Whereas The Shawshank Redemption, which I know Lou is such a big fan of, being so much more of a grounded in like the epitome of reality sort of story. Two of Stephen King's most celebrated adaptations, though. I'm still a little more partial to The Mist, but I still love both of these as well. I love all four times, including The Woman in the Room, that Frank Darabont got the opportunity to adapt Sai King, which is really fun. But as it goes on to say right here, once again, Rick Hipson interviews Frank Darabont about Hopes and Miracles. There's also supposed to be a feature review of Rick Hipson. And I don't think it's really throwing anybody under the bus when you just plainly say, that stuff is not in here. And I'm pretty disappointed, if I'm going to be candid about that. It's one of the reasons that I pre-ordered this. I mean, of course, I was going to pre-order it for, the brand new Sai King short story, but which is entitled The Extra Hour. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But I got to admit, there is a forthcoming signed limited edition hardcover. I'm assuming they are going to remedy that absence by the time that hits publication. But yeah, it's a bummer. It's a bummer because I was really looking forward to that interview, and it's not in here. So anyway, I just really had to kind of get that off my chest. First and foremost, it's a little bit of a disappointment, but it is what it is. And so I'm gonna jump back down here really quick and look. You're gonna do spoilers. You know, Lou, I'm really gonna dance around. It's not super long, just to show you guys. I mean, without. So, so the short story, as I mentioned, is called The Extra Hour. So there we go. Got this interesting artwork by Francois Vaillancourt. When it comes to the French pronunciations, or maybe it's French Canadian. Maybe Lou would know a little bit better than me. But yeah, so the artwork is interesting. Take a better gander right there. So we've got some numbers on dude's face, and so we've got one page. We've got a double-sider here, and then it is rounded out with another full page, and then there is a very, very, very brief interview that Bev Vincent does with Stephen King. It's like it's like less than 10 questions. It's pretty brief, and I thought it was going to be Steve giving a little bit more insight into this particular story, and it's not really. But in any event, I mean, anytime I can read, even if it's something brief or it's just a quick little video Sai King doing for promotional purposes or whatever, I always like reading that. And then I've also got Bev Vincent does for each of these magazines from the Dead Zone. And so he gives some of his thoughts about You Like It Darker, which was the short story collection that was released last year. I had the great opportunity to sit down and discuss all of those stories with Mike Kearns from Mike's Book Reviews. Always want to shout out my fellow traveler along the path of the beam and all that jazz. And so, but yeah, so you've got a decent little helping of King stuff, a couple pages where breaking some stuff down and whatnot. And then just to give it that brief little rundown, I mean, Chuck's story, which I mentioned, which is entitled, where are we at? It's actually the one that finishes the story. It's called The Prophecy of Ruth. And so since I just got this earlier today and I just read the story about an hour ago, I haven't got the chance to really peruse much more aside from looking for that Frank Darabont stuff that's not in there. But in any event, guys, so just some brief thoughts about this story. And Lou asked if there was going to be spoilers. I'm going to try not to really go into super spoilery territory or anything like that. Okay, spending a lot of coin on King books, must be making good money as a student. No, I'm still working full-time, dude. So, I'm full-time student, full-time working. So, yeah, not much time for Hail to Stephen King, unfortunately, which is a bit of a bummer. So, okay, this is an appetizer from Sai King for the lead up to Never Flinch. Yeah, I suppose so. And Never Flinch, just as Jose brought up, Never Flinch, which is the next Holly book. Holly Hope, guys. Yeah, we have another Holly book. It's entitled Never Flinch, although as King mentioned in the interview, the brief one that he does with Vincent in here, he does say that Holly is back to being along with a cast of people. So it's like more of an ensemble as opposed to in the previous one where it's like completely focused on her. But then again, we had already done a complete focus on Holly with her as the main character with If It Bleeds, right? So I don't know. I actually quite like the Holly book. But yet I was ready for a bit of a break from her, which is why You Like It Darker, even though I had read the predominance of those stories already because they had already been published in various forms. All of the novellas, like the Bastards and Answer Man and stuff like that. Those were all brand new to the You Like It Darker collection. But a lot of the shorts were I had already taken like Finn and Red Screen, stuff like that. I'd read all of those before. So, but yes, it is as Jose pointed out, this is most definitely an appetizer for Never Flinch, which arrives May 27th. It feels a little derivative, unfortunately, of certain things that I have read from Sai King previously, one of which I am going to at least mention here. So, but in any event, correct. I saw another name that jumped in there too. Okay, Evening Fuego. Yeah, Movie Mike. What's going on, man? Glad I caught this. Yeah, Movie Mike. As I mentioned earlier, this is very impromptu. I didn't realize that. Like, I got the email that they were shipping this out finally after I pre-ordered a while back, but I didn't realize it was going to arrive today. And so I'm like, hey, it's Tower Tuesday, and besides all of that, the fact that I just wanted to really do something quickly as opposed to having to, film upload, overlay, edit, render, upload to YouTube. I mean, sometimes this really cuts out a lot of the middleman, and I can just streamline the process and get right back to Spanish, which is what I'm working on tonight. And so, but in any event, to the story itself, King has been doing this for a while with releasing shorts on various outlets, whether it's, things like, Vanity Fair, New York Times, or just putting stuff directly on his .com, including it in collections. And so I will say that some of the short fiction that King has done in the last number of years, especially since I've been doing Hail to Stephen King, I still think he has some really great stories in him. Finn, I didn't like it as much when I initially read it. That's the one about the dude who gets kidnapped and it's a whole mistaken identity sort of thing. He's an Irish guy, luck of the Irish, or the lack thereof in his case. So, excuse me. So that story, I wasn't super hot on it when I first read it. But then when I was listening to it in the audiobook form, I was quite impressed. And I'm trying to remember if Weber was the one who read that particular one. But in any event, Steve Weber, what his name is? Anyway, but so that one I enjoyed. Laurie, which is where you actually get the cover art for You Like It Darker with that croc on the front, man. Laurie is one of my absolute favorites from You Like It Darker. I thought that story was very sweet and very heartfelt. And another one that he put out the last couple of years, I want to say, it was in a collection that had an association with a particular university's literature department, I want to say, but it was called Plowshares. But the story was called Thin Scenery, and it was done in play form. And I thought that was excellent, so original and so interesting. And so this is me saying that I think that King most definitely has a lot of original ideas in his body still. And unfortunately, I don't really feel like the extra hour is one of them. It is just a little too reminiscent of some things that he's done before, at least for my particular taste. So what this is kind of reminiscent of. So without getting into like super spoilers about what actually happens. So long story short, as my father likes to say, but without revealing any endings or any super spoilery things. So this story commences with a guy who shows up at his lawyer's spot, and he is basically talking about the fact that he is curious about some certain stipulations with his will because he's aging. He seemingly is having some health problems, as you can see from, that's supposed to be at least the character we're introduced right at the beginning. I believe his name is, where is it at? Danton. And so Danton shows up at his lawyer, Soames' spot, and he's like going over some certain aspects of his will. And then he starts to describe a particular affliction that he is enduring at the moment. And his lawyer is like, oh man, he's got to be dying of cancer or, some sort of crazy debilitating disease like that, terminally ill, whatever. And yet Danton clarifies pretty quickly. He's like, no, I'm experiencing insomnia. Sai King. Dramatic pause, I know. But we had a book entitled Insomnia about a guy, Ralph, why can't I think of his Ralph Roberts, I want to say. Good book. A book that I think if you trim some of the excessive fat and some of the tower connections, because I love the tower connections in that book, especially with a particular character who shows up, who is just a kid doing little drawings. I like to do drawings. But yeah, that is a book that I think could be adapted into a series, and especially with some of the politics about, women's right to choose and things of that nature that are very heavily just focused upon in that book. I think it would be very poignant with a lot of stuff that's happening in the United States currently, as far as that debate and Roe versus Wade. Regardless of what your political affiliations may be, I'm a registered independent. So, I kind of flip one way and the other, depending on the issue, whether, immigration or abortion or whatever, all of these hot topic issues. But so, yeah, I feel like Insomnia could be a really excellent limited series. Like give it to like Apple TV Plus or Max or something like that. For the uninitiated, take away the tower connections. And I think you could have a very, very interesting psychedelic awesome sort of story. But it's the fact that, and King has written lots of other stuff. I mean, just in You Like It Darker, one of the novellas was that, what, Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream, I think it was called. And then there's lots of other stories about dreams and things of that nature, and just like sleep and things like that in general. I mean, it definitely weighs very heavily on Just After Sunset, for instance. There's a lot of stories about, like dream premonitions, and because there was so much residual kind of survivor's guilt shortly after 9/11. And so I love Just After Sunset. I know it's definitely one of Stephen King's more underrated collections, but just the whole vibe of those tales and just the thematical interconnectivity amongst a lot of them, I really enjoyed. And so King has written about dreaming and about sleep or whatever, but it's very specifically that in this one he decides to do a lack thereof. And so Danton starts telling Soames, his attorney, about the fact that he's getting less and less sleep. And so I'm going to be very careful, as Lou was asking, as I proceed here, because I don't want to be, because the story does shift about halfway through, and as you guys could see, it's only like 5 pages, something like that. Can't be more than like probably 2,000 words, but nonetheless, it does pivot. So what I'm saying here, at least at the beginning, is the setup and kind of like a very brief little description of the plot. And the plot does focus on insomnia, lack of sleep. And, it's something that I can still relate to in this day and age, because I suffer from insomnia, unless I, take like a edible, or, have some beers, or like it's a sleeping pill maybe, or something, or whatever. Like, I am a very, very restless sleeper. And it didn't really used to be that way in my younger years, but for whatever reason, as I've gotten older, like once I hit my 30s, man, was when it started to really become apparent that I was struggling with sleeping. And so it's like, yeah, unless I can conk myself out with some sort of additional aid, which is actually discussed in this story about the fact that Danton's character, as he's relaying to Soames, his attorney, about all the things that he has done to try to combat his insomnia, because he's like, yeah, it was just like less and less and less and less and less sleep. And now I'm down to like, I can get about 45 hours a night. Thank God I am not to that point. I still can get a good like 4, maybe 5 hours, but man, there were many years where I couldn't even get like, more than like 3 sometimes, because sleep for like an hour or so, wake up, toss and turn, maybe fall back asleep, sleep for another hour. Like, that's kind of a typical night for me, unfortunately. And so it is something that I endure, still to this day. And, you don't want to, you don't want to like drink in crazy excess to be able to sleep, because that's big time dependency. But as even said in this, the character's like, I wasn't trying to get dependent on Ambien and, things like, so if you need aids to sleep, whether it's alcohol or a pharmaceutical drug or whatever it may be, that most definitely is kind of problematic, right? You should be able to just like exhaust yourself to the level where your body is just like, no more recharge time. But then again, some of the most brilliant people, like, but didn't Einstein say that he just took like little cat naps and he never really like slept? Who knows if the guy ever really hit REM and, end of my day as I know it, and I'm going to go and sleep for a little bit or whatever. But so, yeah, guys, this is a story. So, but back to the title itself. So the extra hour is where King does at least deviate a little bit within this analysis of insomnia, because of the fact that our character Danton, who introduces us to the fact that he's being afflicted by lack of sleep and how he can't sleep, is that every night he reaches a particular point where he hits what he calls the extra hour. And so the extra hour, without getting into too much description about it, is where he feels like he gets to that point of insomnia where time like basically like freezes on him. And so he looks over at the clock, and the clock is just nothing but and signs, as opposed to actually showing numbers. And so this extra hour, he loosely describes it as the extra hour because it's not even really like just an hour of extra time, like an extra hour added to the day. And Danton does say something interesting at one point where he's like, yeah, well, we add an extra day to February every 4 years. And yet, well, no, that's because, just the rotation of the earth and how like our calendars and everything are like 99.9 whatever percent. And so that's why we end up having to add that extra day to make things like even out, or at least to the best of my understanding. I'm sure those more well versed in those sort of things would be able to correct me or instruct me a little more properly on all this. But it is an interesting factoid that Danton, our character, who was initially suffering from insomnia, makes mention of. And yeah, so that extra hour when time, and of course his attorney is like, well, yeah, you're starting to kind of lose your grip from lack of sleep, and you're starting to trip out. You're losing your grip of reality. Very similar to what was happening with Ralph in Insomnia, where he started seeing the little floaty balloons and everything and all the colors and whatnot. But, as opposed to being more colorful and psychedelic, in this particular case, Danton, King's character that's being, that is suffering from it in this, he's like, yeah, I look at the walls and they look soft. And I mean, it's not as developed, I guess, because it is a short story, but it feels a little more dark and sinister and just weird, as opposed to, there was kind of a invigorating psychedelia to the way that King wrote how Ralph Roberts was experiencing insomnia. And of course, some of the abilities that he starts to gain over the course of that story. I mean, it really makes me want to reread Insomnia now, although that's a monster of a tome. So I'll get back to it at some particular point, because I've only read it twice in all of my journeys along the path of the beam. But so without getting into too much more, because there's a lot more that I want to say, but I feel like it might be delving into, so how do I put this then? So life insurance policy is, disregard from his lawyer. Danton goes off, and then he sends a letter to his lawyer a little bit later in the story, well, like a page later, because it's so short. And he's just like, don't worry, I fixed it. And then as time goes on, and I should also mention this story takes place in 2005, which is interesting that King just randomly decided to set the story there, although it does catch up rather speedily to what seems like present day, or at least up to present day, when King finished this story and decided to send it over to Richard and Blewett Cemetery Dance. But another story where I could make a big time comparison here, and I don't think it's that much of a spoiler to do it, so I guess I'm just going to do it. But after Danton mentions like the whole essence of insomnia to Soames, his attorney, as we get to the second half of the story, suddenly Soames starts experiencing insomnia too. And I'm going to leave it at that, and not going to tell you where things go with either of the characters from there. But another thing that makes me kind of like take pause and be like, really, Sai, is the fact that that is immediately, to me at least, reminiscent of N. And N, in the aforementioned Just After Sunset, which is an excellent short story, man. It's borderline novella-length, actually. It was adapted into a motion comic, and then they later expanded that with Marvel Comics and turned it into a full-fledged. You can get a trade of it in both hardcover and paperback. But the idea with N was that, could insanity be kind of passed along just from describing it to somebody? And in that story, you've got this guy who, went down and took all these photos of this crazy like formation of rocks, this circle of rocks in Maine. And then he goes and tells somebody else about it. And then that person in turn gets obsessive about this particular, remote field in the middle of nowhere with these rocks and everything. And so, but the whole idea of that story was really like, can insanity be contagious? And so King is obviously going back to the well a little bit, and he's like, okay, so can insomnia be passed along like a disease of sorts? And so those are really the only two details of this story, without going into excess as to like how things are resolved, what happens to characters, anything of that nature. I'm not going to give any more details about any of that, because as Lou had, expressed some hesitation and some trepidation about, obviously, I'm not going to say where things go from there. That is essentially like if you jumped on IMDb and read a plot synopsis or something. Now, granted, some trailers and some synopsises are like way more spoilery than others, but I felt like those two bits, especially since they've shown up in prior works by Sai King, had to be mentioned in this review of the story because of the fact that they kind of took away a little bit from my enjoyment of it. That's why the thumbnail is me being like, okay, sure. So yeah, the extra hour. I think what's happening with King now at this point in his career, in his as he's aging, without because he's obviously still very sharp and still can, I mean, hell, I was just watching Juror Number 2 last night, the latest from Clint Eastwood. He directed that movie. He's like in his 90s now, and that movie is pretty damn awesome, man. Very thrilling and great performances, well shot. I mean, granted, somebody like him or other aging directors like a Ridley Scott or a George Miller or whatever, they still have great teams behind them and around them, cinematographers and people handling like post-production and editing and whatever. But yeah, man, I mean, King is still very sharp, but I feel like there is a little bit of a recycling of ideas. And people could even say way back with something like Salem's Lot, it's like, oh well, he's just recycling Dracula. But it's a little bit different in my estimation when you're taking something that is kind of a proven idea or whatever, but you're really like reforming it and refashioning it into your own sort of thing. And that is definitely not what happened with Nosferatu, which it was just a blatant ripoff of Dracula. For instance, I have to get my shots in on that movie a little bit because as great as it looked, wasn't the biggest fan. But yeah, guys, at this point, I feel like King is almost borrowing from himself a little more so. And I've not so much accused him of it. I don't even think these are accusations. I think this is like very plain and evident at this particular point. And so that's why I enjoyed stuff like Thin Scenery so much and like Laurie. I mean, stories that were sent, or even Finn, or even oh goodness, I'm the title is eluding me from You Like It Darker, but the one where they're arguing with Grandpa and the vehicle breaks down and there's these people trying to rob them as they're on this like very isolated little road, like stories that are nothing like anything that I've really read before from King. And when I encounter a story like this and I'm just like, oh, this totally reminds me of this that King did before and this that King did before, he's my favorite author. I am a devoted constant reader, and I can't wait for any time he puts something new out, man. But I've just got kind of mixed feelings about something like this that is just so reminiscent of things that I have read before. That's not to say it isn't without its merits. I like the idea. So back to what I was trying to say earlier, and I totally spaced it and jumped off on a tangent, but I feel like King like had this idea come to him, and he's like, the extra hour when somebody can't sleep and they're almost caught in this weird limbo that, it's the extra hour of the day, a 25th hour of the day, but it feels just endless. It's way longer than an hour, or maybe it's way less. It's all about perception. I mean, it was kind of hitting those psychedelic vibes with me a little bit because as somebody who's like, taking part in psychedelics, getting into, grown in the ground things, specifically. And I know how perception of time is drastically altered in those sort of situations. And so it's just like, you feel like hours have gone by and you're like, oh no, you guys have only been outside on the grass for like 25 minutes. And you're like, what? I feel like we've been out here for hours, So yeah, I mean, reality is relative. Perception is what it is and everything. But yeah, man, I mean, I'm not here to tear this story to pieces or anything, and I feel like my thumbnail was a little bit misleading because I know that there is so much hate culture on YouTube, and I can't stand it, But I'm not gonna sugarcoat my feelings about something like this, I'm gonna point out its merits about the fact that King had an interesting idea of what if there was an extra hour that somebody felt like they were experiencing after they were past a certain point of lack of sleep. And yet it just feels so much like Ralph's very lengthy and much more interesting adventure in Insomnia. And so that's about the most that I'm going to say about it. Although the framing device of the extra hour is, I suppose, what does give this a little bit more of a uniqueness and stuff. Now, it is on the darker side in the back half of what happens, and that's not what I'm going to, delve into or get into or anything like that. But yeah, it was it was familiar, but not necessarily in that familiar, like, oh, it's like a nice warm, nice warm blanket on a cold winter night. And it's a little bit more like, oh, this is the leftovers from the other day, and they've been in the fridge for a little bit. And well, I guess that's a little bit meaner of an analogy than I was thinking of. But it's hey, the excuse me, guys. The prose is still good. The dialogue, most notably between King's two characters, Danton and Soames, in this, and the first part of the story is good, and it's intriguing. It has that little zip and that zip and wit and everything like you would expect from King. But yeah, I'm gonna be candid. I was a little bit disappointed in this one because I always have just a great deal of anticipation, and that's the burden of expectation. As I always say, whether it's here or on the horror show, man, the burden of expectation is something very, very difficult to deal with sometimes. So, but yeah, guys, if you have any interest in actually checking this out yourselves, this is the 79th issue of Cemetery Dance magazine. So you can pick this up for $9.95 plus shipping, unless you can find it at a newsstand. Being in Arizona as opposed to in New England, where Cemetery Dance is based, I've never seen this on a newsstand. But yeah, I would imagine if you're somewhere in like Massachusetts or Maine, or maybe even like somewhere in New York or whatever, you would be able to find a copy of this. Otherwise, I think shipping's like $4 or $5, whatever. And then if you want to really splurge for the hardcover edition and actually get those promised Frank Darabont bits that aren't in here, yeah, all the stuff about Green Mile, which I was very much looking forward to reading, a little bit disappointed about its absence. There is that signed hardcover for $75. I'm not sure who it's signed by. I'm assuming it's not Steve. I thankfully got a couple of signed things from Steve, but never had him sign something for me personally, unfortunately. Although Joe Hill got Steve's son had the chance to have that awesome opportunity with him. But so I'm not sure if it's signed by maybe Glenn Chadbourne, for instance, who Glenn is a frequent collaborator of King, and he's got a pretty dope illustration here for a story called S.A. Cosby called Blood Red and the Riding Hood. Like, check it out. His stuff is always just really badass, in my opinion, man. Yeah. It's a lot cooler looking than the werewolf in that Lee Winnell movie that just came out this past weekend. It wasn't bad, but I was a little underwhelmed, unfortunately, despite the fact that I really like Christopher Abbott as an actor. I think that guy's pretty awesome. So, yeah, guys, if you want to check it out yourselves, I still have lots of love for Cemetery Dance, even if they didn't hook it up as promised in this regard. I'm going to stop beating that red-headed dead horse because that's not particularly cool of me. But okay, so I'm going to, since I've been going for about a little over a half hour now, which was longer than I even thought I was going to spend talking about a 5-page story, but I'm going to see what everybody else is saying here. Okay, spending a lot of coin. Yeah, $10. Once again, $10 for this magazine, man. And that's the thing. The nice thing about the pre-orders, I can do them with my PayPal, and PayPal has that pay in 4. And so I'm like, oh, it's $100 Cemetery Dance book. I can break it into a couple $25 installments. Anyway, glad I caught this. Yep, I saw that. Making sure. Okay, I'm listening to the audio book of At the Moment for Insomnia. Nice. Forgot a lot. It's really good. Yeah, Insomnia is pretty damn awesome, man. It's not without its detractors, and King has actually said that it's a little bit bloated. Okay, Lou says, Amen, Fuego. Insomnia would make a great limited series. Wish King would do some more hyper reality stories. Yeah, Lou, I totally agree about the hyper reality stories, and I guess Lori would be a hyper reality story. I mean, there's nothing supernatural or otherworldly or whatever going on, and even without getting too much into it with the most recent Holly book. Well, yeah, I guess Holly with what those professors were able to experience. It was kind of like what was the cannibal movie I liked so much? Ravenous, the one that had Guy Pearce, which was really excellent. Anyway, okay. Back to Jose Storm. Speaking of adaptations, The Monkey is coming out soon. Yeah, Jose. So February 21st, The Monkey from adapted, excuse me, from Skeleton Crew, where it was collected in the 80s. 85, if I recall correctly. I've seen some people. Loach's Library, dude. He was saying just earlier today that he's approaching with some reservations this adaptation of the monkey because he feels like the tone is nothing like the short, and most definitely the tone to this monkey movie looks nothing like because the monkey short story is very sad and somber, and yeah, there's graphic death and everything in it, but I kind of dig the fact that Oz Perkins is doing something very drastically different with his approach as a because I mean, especially being a short story and everything, I think you really got to add some of your own flavor when you're expanding. And I don't know, as somebody who loves things like Very Bad Things, which is kind of the vibe that I'm getting from this movie. If you guys have ever seen Peter Berg's Very Bad Things with John Favreau, Christian Slater, Daniel Stern, Cameron Diaz, that movie kicks ass. It is so funny, but so dark and fucked up too. That is the vibe that I'm getting from the monkey. And I hate to use that phrase, I'm here for it. But yeah, man, I'm stoked for it. I truly am, man. I'm excited for that movie. I didn't like Longlegs very much, but I really like Gretel and Hansel, and I love The Black Coat's Daughter, his directorial debut. So yeah, I've got faith in that guy. I think he's going to do a damn good job. Comes out February 21st. We will have a review over on the horror show for that one, Cecil and myself, upon it coming out. All right, what else we got? It's been. I'm trying to read Lou's comment here. It's been turned into more of a Final Destination. Okay, yeah, I can see the Final Destination type of vibe too. I have deliberately not watched the newest trailer because at this point I just get so upset about spoilers, and this is one where I feel like I know enough about the short, and I like when adaptations of Cy King throw me curveballs, at least when they're done well, like The End of the Mist, for instance, even though that was kind of hinted at the end of the novella from Dark Forces, but still, I want to go into this one blind, and so I even told Cecil, I was like, "No, man, I'm not reacting. Next time I see you to any additional trailers for the monkey. I'm just gonna go in and experience it, and hopefully enjoy it." So, but I like the Final Destination comp, man. I think that's very insightful. Wait till you get into your 60s. Oh boy, sleep becomes more elusive as you get older, and perhaps that's why Cy King is actually revisiting it. You know what I mean? Because of the fact that he's like, okay, these are things that I'm experiencing even more than 30 years ago. God, it's been 30 years practically since, I think it has been like just right around the 30-year mark for Insomnia. I think Insomnia was 94, so we just passed that 30-year anniversary. But I can only imagine now that he's in his 70s compared to when he was in his 40s when he was working on that book. Okay, Movie Mike says it does sound derivative, but with such a short read, I will give it a look for sure. Yeah, and that's the thing. I never tell people not to check something out just because I wasn't over the moon or super super hot for it. It's like, as I always say, man. I mean, art is subjective. Always give it your own sort of glance and look, and that's why, like, anytime like yesterday, for instance, I went and I watched Wolfman, and I was too busy with school to go to the press screening with Cecil and Robert last week. And so, plus I've been having some problems with my vehicle. But yeah, aside from that, I was like, okay, I'm not going to watch Cecil and Robert's review. I'm not going to watch any other friends of ours, whether it's, Drum Dums or whether it's, like bigger YouTubers that I enjoy and respect, like a Stuckman or, Johns or whatever, I like the Fish Jelly guys. I like, there's a lot of different reviewers that all encompass various perspectives and like sort of tastes and whatnot. So I'm not like watching a review to try to get validation about my own opinions or whatever, or to have my opinion formed for me beforehand. It's, it's definitely of my own and of that particular ilk. Okay. It's Eastwood's last movie too, I believe. Yep. Lou, you are correct. Juror number 2 is his last movie from what I understand, at least. And, it's not Unforgiven. It's not $1 Million Baby. It's not Mystic River, but it's really good. It's really good. It's actually kind of got a Mystic River type of vibe to it in some ways. And Nicholas Hoult is really good in it. He was great in all 3 movies I saw him in this year, whether it was The Order with Jude Law, where he's the bad guy. He was good in Nosferatu. I just didn't really like that movie very much. Anywho, okay. So since we're about to round it on out, I have a little bit of self-plagiarism. I think a little bit of self-plagiarism is probably inevitable after so many years. Glad it's confined to a short piece. Yeah, and I mean, you just have themes, I guess, that you like to explore, and so that's why you go back to the well. You return to them, and yeah, oh my goodness, is that who I think it is? It's okay to use power chords over and over again. Oh man, brother Payne, it is good to see you on there, man, Mister Winston Smith. In any event, yes, shout out to my front man homie from Sanitation Squad. Anyway, and I'm getting off track here. Okay, and so then I see Steve Morris says, "Greetings, Fuego and chat. New to your channel, just subscribed and liked." Hey, thanks so much, Steve. You know, this is a channel that I haven't had the opportunity to give as much attention to since I went back to pursue a bachelor's in film and media studies. I still probably am involved in more content on the horror show than I am here, but yeah, I did a Joe Hill video just the other day, first one in a while, because over the holiday weekend, with MLK Day yesterday and everything, I had some extra time. Joe Hill had just announced King Sorrow, his first full novel in almost a decade. It's like 900 pages. It echoes a few of his dad's things a little bit, but I have the utmost faith in Joe, because he's at that right age where he's firing on all cylinders, and he still has yet to do something that I did not like. Now, there's been things I liked less than others, but man, Joe Hill is the Shiznito band. That guy most definitely knows what's up, and I have loads of respect, and I can't wait for that book of his. And so, Steve, thanks for jumping on and subscribing, man. I mean, the content comes when it comes, but just make sure to hit the bell so that whenever I do put the next King video or Joe Hill video or something like that up, you take a gander. It would mean a lot, man. Okay. And then at the very bottom, Commando Bro, I'm on the fence with Wolfman. I love Nosferatu. I've seen it 2 times in a row. Yeah. And I mean, Commando Bro, from a stylistic standpoint, I really appreciate like every Robert Eggers movie, all 4 of them at this particular point now, I have just adored from a stylistic standpoint. I mean, the Witch, still my personal favorite, with Anya Taylor-Joy. I need to revisit The Lighthouse, because that's one that it was a little bonkers for me. And, I think maybe if my mind was a little more expanded, I would have perhaps been a little bit more appreciative. But I mean, and yet even that one, I thought performances were really good. The Northman was just a little too familiar for me, but I like Skarsgård quite a bit. So, but no, I love the look of Nosferatu, the costuming. I mean, the recreation of the period, the color saturation, everything I thought was great. I was just not. I'm just always going to be pretty critical of Nosferatu because of the fact that it's basically a Dracula ripoff, And I mean, so much so that the Stoker estate sued those German filmmakers when they first made that, and they were supposed to destroy all the prints. I mean, you guys have probably heard all of these things at this particular point. So, but once again, to each their own. If you loved it that much, man, I have a lot of friends in the horror community, whether fellow YouTubers or just in Fright fans in general, that loved Nosferatu. My lady, who I went to see it with, she loved it, except for the ending. So, yeah, guys, I mean, that's really, I was on here just to talk about this in an impromptu fashion. The latest short story from Stephen King, it's called The Extra Hour. Obviously, as somebody who has read every single one of Stephen King's books in published order, all of the short stories as they debut, I just jump onto them anytime they rear their frightening faces or whatever. I always have to at least get on this with the quickness. One other thing that I do have to say, because it was pretty exciting news that King revealed on Threads, because I know he hates Muskie now, and so he's over on Threads, which is like, it's the Facebook, Instagram version of X, Twitter, kind of, sort of. And so I know that's where King is doing a lot of his posting. That's where Joe Hill is posting a lot right now too. Yeah, so he did reveal that he's working on that 3rd Talisman book. He's working off of a great idea that Rest Peacefully, Peter Straub, no longer with us, unfortunately, co-wrote both the Talisman and the Black House. And, based on when the Talisman was actually released, I got to say, man, that I don't necessarily know if, the Path of the Beam, the Dark Tower series is what it is, especially in my personal favorite entries, like, the Wastelands and, and Wizard and Glass and stuff. I don't really know if the series kind of pivots the way that it does, if not for King working with Straub on something like the Talisman. And then, Black House like fully exploits all of those connective tissues, where you've got Parkus, talking with Jack very directly about the tower and all that stuff. So, I'm very excited that he said that he's working on it. But I think Lilja's library also said this too, where he's like, just because he says he's working on something doesn't guarantee that we are going to see it, because King, he's not going to release something unless, he is to the point where he knows it's going to, I mean, first and foremost, he doesn't want it to suck, because both of those books are excellent, and they're both so drastically different in Black House and in the Talisman. And they're fantastical, and there's horror elements and fantasy elements. I mean, it is in every way similar to the Dark Tower books, in just especially those middle Dark Tower books, and the amalgamation of so many different influences all coming together. And so I know if King like hits some serious writers, like he's not gonna like steamroll through and just finish it for the sake of finishing it. I truly trust that, he thinks that Straub had some really great ideas with the notes and stuff that they had exchanged before his passing. And so that's very exciting news, Talisman 3 coming, or at least Talisman 3 being worked on, not necessarily guaranteed to be coming, but the fact that King does want to conclude the trilogy is very exciting, because I love those two books. And obviously there is a finale for Jack Sawyer, which I would love to, and who knows, man? I mean, Holly will probably show up in it, right? If we go like full on Tower connections like we had with Black House. But, even if it's not a Dark Tower book proper, Talisman 3 with having Tower connections, although then, I wasn't super, super hot on the Tower connections in the third Gwendy book. So I don't know. I'm just hoping that it's orchestrated well, that it, I don't know, just lives up to the reputation of the two previous books. And I'm excited that the gears are at least turning in his head. So that's cool. And other King stuff, I mean, just to wrap it up here, you guys know Welcome to Derry, the prequel series that is coming to Max. Andy Muschietti said recently that it's going to be debuting on the streaming service, but it's also going to be airing on HBO proper as well, which shows that they have a lot of faith in this, I would imagine. It's supposed to be debuting in September. We don't have a specific date yet, so that's pretty dope. Edgar Wright's The Running Man, I believe, is dated for November 7th. So I'm not super big on Glenn Powell. I did a whole preview of King in 2025, so I'm not going to go super into this. But I have the utmost faith in Edgar Wright, and Coleman Domingo being cast as the evil show host that, oh goodness, the family, was it the Love Game guy, or the Love Set? Richard Dawson, I want to say, was the villain in the Schwarzenegger one from the 80s. So in any event, man, there's a lot of King stuff coming later this year. And as Jose Storm said earlier in this broadcast, on May 27th, that is when we will get presumably our next bit of Sai King writing. But if you need a little morsel, a little appetizer, and just something to check out, you have the Extra Hour, which is housed in this, along with Chuck Palahniuk and various other peeps. So yeah, give it a gander if you guys, if it please you. So in any event, everybody, I'm gonna get back to the schooling, and thanks for everybody who decided to tune in. I've been going for almost an hour. That was not necessarily the intention. So if you were watching this after the fact, if you've read this, if you have any thoughts, insights, comments, whatever, please leave them below. You guys know the drill here on the YouTubies, the liking and the sharing and subscribing, all that jazz, and ringing the bell, so that when I do actually get the opportunity to jump on here and share some palaver with you guys, you're actually made aware of it, even if it is like a last minute sort of situation like this one. So in any event, gracias to everybody who jumped on and said hello. We've got oh man, Matthew Martinez just jumping on right as I'm finishing things up. But Tolu, Commando Bro, Movie Mike, Brother Payne, Winston Smith, Jose Storms, Commando Bro, Steve. Thanks everybody who tuned in and jumped on the chat and said a few things. Greatly appreciated. And that's gonna do it, everybody. So until the We Love Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, sen amigos, constant readers and viewers alike. Say thank you. Hoping we share more of this King Palaver sooner rather than later. If you guys have any interest in Sai King's son, Joe Hill, that video where I basically preview King Sorrow and do a review of his 2 recent short stories, Ushers and The Pram, that is here on my channel. So give that a gander if it pleases you as well. So anyway, guys, that is going to do it. And until next time, I hope we have been well met. And read some Stephen King. And if you feel inclined, give this one a look. See what you think. Make up your own mind. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate y'all. And until next time.